Hey folks, real quick, we wanted to apologize for the way we handled the recent video about Dahmer's victims. While we aimed to blend information with jokes and entertainment, we made light of and chose poor language when talking about victims whose families are still around today. We screwed up, and we've taken the video down out of respect. For over a year, we've at times talked about some pretty dark topics, and maybe we've got a little jaded, but we're happy to have fans who will call us out when we need it. We will strive to do better. Thank you for your honesty and support. Now, back to the video. The Kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr., 1932. On a dark and stormy night, okay, maybe it wasn't stormy, but it was definitely dark, America's most famous baby disappeared. This was not your average neighborhood missing pet poster situation. No, this was the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr., the son of Charles Lindbergh, the man who flew solo across the Atlantic and became America's first celebrity pilot. And in 1932, Lindbergh wasn't just famous, he was practically a national treasure. So, when his 20-month-old son vanished from their mansion in Hopewell, New Jersey, the whole country went into full-on panic mode. It was the crime of the century, the biggest news story of its time, and unfortunately, one of the worst true crime cases in American history. But before we get into the crime itself, let's talk about the Lindbergh family. You see, Charles Lindbergh wasn't just any old rich guy. He was basically the Elon Musk of aviation, minus the Twitter meltdowns and you-know-what. His wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, was an equally impressive woman, as she was an aviator, author, and someone who probably never had to wait in line for anything. So when they welcomed their baby in 1930, the baby automatically became so famous he might as well have been the original influencer. But on March 1st, 1932, everything changed. Baby Charles had been put to bed at 7:30 p.m. by his nanny, Betty Gow. His parents were downstairs, probably enjoying a quiet evening discussing the latest advancements in aviation or whatever famous people did in the 1930s. Then, at 10 p.m., Anne went to check on the baby, but instead of finding a peacefully sleeping toddler, she found an empty crib. Panic set in. The window was open, the baby was gone, and on the windowsill sat a ransom note which read, and I quote, "Dear Sir, have $50,000 ready. After 2 to 4 days, we will inform you where to deliver the money." Now, I don't want to criticize a criminal mastermind, but this ransom note looked like it was written by someone who lost a fight with spell check. The grammar was awful, the handwriting was suspicious, and it included a weird signature, 2 interlocking circles with 3 dots inside. It was either a secret symbol or a very ambitious game of tic-tac-toe. Lindbergh immediately called the police, and soon the biggest manhunt in U.S. history began. When detectives arrived, they found a homemade wooden ladder which had broken into pieces. Clearly, the kidnapper had some balance issues and took a tumble. Then there were footprints in the mud, but no fingerprints inside the house. And finally, there were no signs of forced entry, which suggests the person climbed in and out through the window. Lindbergh, being the action hero he was, took things into his own hands. He followed ransom demands that led him on a wild goose chase, leaving money in different locations and hoping for his son's return. But instead of reuniting with little Charles, he got nothing. Weeks passed, and then on March 12, 1932, a truck driver made a gruesome discovery just a few miles from the Lindbergh home: the remains of baby Charles Lindbergh Jr. The autopsy revealed he had died from a severe skull fracture, likely from being dropped when the kidnapper fell off the ladder. And just like that, the case went from kidnapping to murder, and the whole country was now demanding justice. For 2 years, the case went cold, but then in 1934, a ransom bill popped up at a gas station, leading police to Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant and part-time carpenter who was about as good at covering his tracks as he was at spelling. When the police raided his place, they found $14,000 in ransom money hidden in his garage, wood from his attic matched the kidnapper's ladder, and finally, his bad handwriting matched the ransom notes. Hauptmann, of course, denied everything, but the jury wasn't buying it. So in 1935, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. And on April 1936, he was executed in the electric chair, still insisting he was innocent. The Cleveland Kidnappings, 2002 to 2013. Ariel Castro was a school bus driver, a father, and unfortunately for the city of Cleveland, a real-life horror villain. If you looked at him on the street, you'd probably think, just another guy in a dad bod. But behind closed doors, this man was pure evil. For over a decade, he kept 3 young women locked up in his house like a twisted real-world version of Saw. And it all started with Michelle Knight, a 21-year-old mother who had just lost custody of her son and was trying to get her life together. One day, she ran into Ariel Castro, who offered her a ride. And once Michelle got inside his house, Castro trapped her, tied her up, and made it clear that she wasn't leaving. She would later endure horrific abuse for over a decade. Yes, 10 years. Michelle was missing, but since she was an adult, police didn't really prioritize her case. Way to go, justice system. Then, a year later in April 2003, Castro spotted 16-year-old Amanda Berry. Amanda was on her way home from work at Burger King when Castro, who actually happened to be her best friend's dad, offered her a ride. Yep, the evil man knew her dad. Amanda accepted, thinking she'd get home faster. Instead, she got a one-way ticket to a decade-long nightmare. Inside the house, Castro locked her up and told her she'd never see her family again. And just the next year, he kidnapped 14-year-old Gina De Jesus, who was best friends with Castro's daughter. This man really had no moral compass. It was broken and buried 6 feet deep. He lured Gina into his car, pretending he needed help finding his daughter. She trusted him because he was her best friend's dad. And just like Michelle and Amanda, Gina ended up chained, locked, and trapped in his horror house. He kept them in separate rooms, starved them, and made their lives a living hell. At one point, Amanda Berry got pregnant with Castro's child, and she was forced to give birth inside the house. And guess who helped deliver the baby? Michelle Knight. Because apparently Castro thought kidnapping victims also doubled as nurses. But on May 16, 2013, after over a decade of being held captive, Castro made a huge mistake. He forgot to lock Amanda's bedroom door. Amanda took her chance, ran to the front door, and realized it was partially open, and even though the outer storm door was still locked, she screamed for help like her life depended on it because, well, it did. A neighbor named Charles Ramsey heard her screaming and kicked the door open like a real-life action hero. Amanda ran out with her daughter, called 911, and screamed, "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry, I've been kidnapped for 10 years." Police rushed to the house, rescued Michelle and Gina, and finally ended the nightmare. Castro was sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years because, extra punishment just in case he's immortal. But instead of spending life in prison, he took the coward's way out and ended himself in his cell after just 1 month. Yeah, that's a coward for sure. So why don't you do the brave thing and subscribe to our YouTube channel today? Thank you. The Jaycee Dugard case, 1991 to 2009. It was just a normal day on June 10th, 1991, when 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard was just walking to the school bus stop near her home in South Lake Tahoe, California. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a car pulls up, and she can't even think. A man zaps her with a stun gun, yes, a whole taser, and throws her into the car. And guess who was driving? His wife, Nancy Garrido. Yep, husband and wife, the ultimate creepy duo. Her stepdad, Carl Probin, actually saw the whole thing happen from his garage, jumped on his bike, and tried to chase them, but let's be real, bicycles aren't exactly known for catching up to speeding cars. The police were called immediately, but, well, the search went nowhere. And just like that, Jaycee Dugard vanished for the next 18 years. Now, Philip Garrido, the kidnapper, was already a convicted sex offender and had actually served time in prison. But did the authorities keep a close eye on him? Nope. Jaycee was kept in a hidden backyard compound at the Garrido's home in Antioch, California. And by compound, I mean a bunch of sheds and tents surrounded by high fences. It was basically a twisted DIY prison. For the first few years, Jaycee had no idea where she was. She was locked in a shed with nothing but a bucket to use as a toilet. I repeat, a bucket. Forget about indoor plumbing, she didn't even get a proper room. Philip, being a grade-A psycho, brainwashed her into thinking she could never escape. He changed her name to Alyssa as if that would erase her identity, controlled everything she did, and told her the outside world was dangerous. But here's the real kicker. In 1994, when she was just 14, she gave birth to her first child. Yep, she became a mother while still being a kidnapped child herself. 2 years later, she had another daughter. Philip, who was obviously the worst human being alive, convinced Jaycee that this was their family. Meanwhile, Nancy, the wife, acted like Jaycee was a distant relative they were taking care of. The levels of delusion were off the charts. Jaycee raised her daughter inside this backyard prison. They had never been to school, never seen a doctor, and didn't even know the outside world existed. Now, remember that Philip Garrido was on parole as a registered sex offender, which means authorities were supposed to check on him regularly. But every time they did, they somehow missed the literal human prisoners in his backyard. In 1992, parole officers searched his house. Guess where they didn't check? The backyard. In 2002, a neighbor called the cops to say, "Hey, something weird is going on back there." The cops showed up and did nothing. And once again, in 2006, another neighbor called the police and reported sightings of kids in the house, and again, nothing happened. Seriously, the incompetence was Oscar-worthy. Fast forward to August 24th, 2009, and by now, Garrido had gotten so weird that he decided to take his 2 daughters to the University of California, Berkeley, to hand out religious flyers. He started rambling about some weird new church he was starting, because of course he was, and as soon as the campus security saw him, they knew the guy wasn't okay. So they ran a background check and found out he was a registered sex offender with 2 young girls in his custody. And at that point, the authorities finally did what they should have done years ago. They checked out his house and finally found Jaycee Dugard, alive and well, sitting right there in the backyard. Once Jaycee was freed, the world was shocked. People had assumed she was dead for years, but here she was, strong and ready to live again. As for the Garridos, well, they got exactly what they deserved. Philip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years in prison, while Nancy Garrido was sentenced to 36 years to life. She should have honestly gotten more. Jaycee reunited with her mom, wrote a book, and started an organization to help other kidnapping survivors. The Elizabeth Smart Case, 2002 to 2003. So, Elizabeth Smart was a 14-year-old girl living in Salt Lake City, Utah, who loved playing the harp, had a great family who loved her, and was probably just trying to survive math homework like the rest of us. But one night, on June 5th, 2002, things took a horrifying turn. At around 2 a.m., Elizabeth was asleep in her bed when she suddenly woke up to find a man standing over her with a knife. Not exactly the kind of surprise you want in the middle of the night. The man, Brian David Mitchell, whispered, "If you make a sound, I will kill you and your family." At this point, Elizabeth probably wanted to scream, run, or at least grab a pillow and whack this guy in the face, but with the knife inches from her throat, she had no choice but to stay silent. Mitchell forced her out of bed and led her right out of the house while her younger sister, Mary Catherine, pretended to be asleep. But as soon as they were gone, Mary Catherine ran to wake up their parents. But by the time anyone realized what happened, Elizabeth was gone. Mitchell, a self-proclaimed prophet, aka a crazy dude with a Jesus complex, had been lurking around town pretending to be a homeless preacher. Elizabeth's family had even once given him some work around their house because they were good people. Unfortunately, they had no idea they were hiring the future kidnapper of their daughter. He believed he was called by God to take multiple wives, and Wanda Barzee, his equally delusional wife, was completely on board with his creepy plan. Mitchell dragged Elizabeth up into the mountains where he had a makeshift campsite set up. The guy wasted no time forcing her into a disturbing wedding ceremony, declaring her his wife, and then subjected her to months of abuse. And if that wasn't awful enough, Elizabeth was kept chained to a tree, forced to wear robes, and giving a new name, Shiar Jashub. Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast. Actually, don't. It's exhausting. This whole thing is. Elizabeth's disappearance became national news, and the Smart family never gave up hope, working with police, media, and even psychics. However, the real breakthrough came months later when Elizabeth's younger sister, Mary Catherine, suddenly remembered something. She had been lying awake the night of the kidnapping and had recognized Mitchell's voice. Finally, the police had a suspect, and now they just needed to find him. Fast forward 9 months, Elizabeth was still trapped with Mitchell and Barzy, but the trio had come down from the mountains and started walking around in public. Yeah, you heard that right. Mitchell actually thought he could disguise Elizabeth by making her wear a veil and sunglasses. Thankfully, a good Samaritan spotted them at Walmart, suspected something was wrong, and called the police. The police caught the trio on the street, and Mitchell, still fully committed to his delusions, tried to convince the cops that Elizabeth was his daughter. But Elizabeth? She had had enough. So she refuted this claim and told the police her real name. The police arrested Mitchell and Barzy on the spot. Elizabeth was rushed home, where her family, who never stopped believing she was alive, welcomed her back with open arms. Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison, and Barzy got 15 years, which honestly feels too short. Mitchell tried to fake insanity during his trial, singing hymns in court like he was auditioning for American Idol Crazy Edition. But the jury wasn't buying it, so thankfully he is now locked up forever. But Elizabeth later went on to become a motivational speaker, author, and activist, helping other kidnapping survivors. The Atlanta Child Murders, 1979 to 1981. It all started in the summer of 1979 when 2 boys, Edward Smith, who was 14, and Alfred Evans, 13, vanished. Now, kids running off to have fun wasn't unusual, but when their bodies were found days later, things took a grim turn. Then, more kids started disappearing, one by one. Yusuf Bell, 9, Angel Lanier, 12, Jeffrey Mathis, 10, and many others. Just know that the list kept growing, and parents were panicking. Imagine being a kid in Atlanta at the time. Your mom wouldn't even let you step outside to grab a snack. At first, the police thought these were just random runaways, but when body after body started popping up in the woods, rivers, and abandoned buildings, it became clear someone was hunting children. Atlanta basically went DEFCON 1. Parents were terrified. The news was blasting warnings 24/7, and people started keeping their kids locked inside like prized possessions. The pattern was eerie because all of the victims were black, mostly boys, and between the ages of 7 and 14. What was even weirder was that many of them were last seen near bus stops, convenience stores, or community centers, which are places they usually hung out. Sadly, the investigations were a hot mess, and since this was the late 70s and early 80s, high-tech detective work wasn't exactly a thing. There were no security cameras, no smartphones, and no forensic magic tricks like on CSI. So they called the FBI for help, and, well, that's when things started to shake up. The FBI profiler suspected that their criminal was a single suspect, likely a black man who blends into the community and is targeting young boys. Well, in May 1981, police staked out bridges over the Chattahoochee River, hoping to catch the killer dumping a body. Then, at around 3 a.m., officers heard a splash under a bridge and rushed to check, and surprise, surprise, they found Wayne Williams, a 23-year-old music promoter driving a suspicious car. Now, Wayne had been seen near crime scenes acting shady and even tried to get into law enforcement. But when police stopped him, he played it cool, claiming he was just scouting for a singer. At 3 a.m., near a river, in the middle of nowhere. The cops didn't buy it, and 2 days later, a body floated up in the same spot. Yes, scouting for a singer indeed. Wayne Williams was arrested and charged with 2 murders, and the jury didn't take long and found him guilty as charged. Wayne Williams was sentenced to life in prison. Here's where it gets juicy. Even though Williams was convicted, many believe he didn't actually kill all the victims. Some families still doubt the case and argue the police were under massive pressure to pin the murders on someone. To this day, some people still debate whether Wayne Williams was the true monster or just a scapegoat.